I hadn't had to deal with it before. I was just thinking, boy, this stuff looks bad.
Yeah, there's some upstream too by the water plant.
That's pretty new, isn't it? Has it been?
Realizing
Japanese outweigh been the
how
common?
That's not it.
demand for
Doesn't seem to be. Unless,
Yeah, it has.
No.
Haven't really noticed it, I guess.
Yeah, it's.
Well, I'm sorry about that. You know, I mean, stuff happens, you know.
Damn.
Let's see. Well, I should call the meeting to order, and yeah, there's a gavel somewhere in the building, but it doesn't matter.
Bob
Oh,
got
here-
it.
There it
Can we
is.
give it a whack for old time's
There we
sake?
go. So let's see. We should have an agenda, and let's see. Have you been doing the roll call here?
Basically, I can do a roll call for the benefit of the public.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Bob Roth,
Present?
Doug DeHart,
yo,
Richard Craven,
Present.
Brian Boyce,
Present.
Eric Carr,
Present.
Shaw Spady,
Present.
and we're missing Jerry, but he will be late. He's got a talk, and he said he'd get here around 7:45. So.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing any citizens. I think we can pass over the citizen comments and then get on to general business. And are we going to start with the work plan?
Yeah. So, I actually have included in your packet the existing 2012-2013 work plan. And we also have the City Commission's goals and priorities for 2013 through 2015, which were adopted in February of this year. And I also created a template for you to use if you'd like to do some homework. And this is a template called Suggestions for Revisions to the NRC Work Plan 2013 through 2015. And what I'm asking is for a prioritization of your top, and I mean you personally for your homework kind of thing, top 10 local, global environmental issues that you think the NRC and the city should address for the period 2013 through 2015. We're asking you to be considering staffing, budget needs, and city commission goals and priorities. And if you think another issue should be listed, feel free to add that and prioritize that under the other. And so I tried to group these into as close of general categories as I could. And the results with these would be compiled, and then we would update our work plan at a subsequent meeting. And I will bring those back to you. Well, actually, I would report back to you before the next meeting with what people said. And on the back side of the sheet, I tried to include some examples and ideas for work plan action items. So under the prioritization issues, or the issues that I've heard some of you talk about in the last few months, are the first one is climate change. And this is not in order of priority, I'm just listing these. Climate change, global warming, carbon emissions reduction. The second one is weed ordinances, invasive and nuisance plant policies. The third is tree canopy, tree regulation, and urban forest management. The fourth is outdoor lighting. The fifth is a suggestion from the planning staff called active transportation, which is bicycling, pedestrian, and transit recommendations. The sixth one is advising on low impact and stormwater development standards. The next one is efforts to public outreach and local group into coordination and education, such as working with the Oregon City Watershed Council and other activist groups who have an interest in the environment here in Oregon City. And sustainable building and home efficiency, waste reduction, composting, and recycling, and then watershed health. And I'm sure I haven't touched on everything because our bylaws and our mandate are quite broad. I did not include your copies of your existing bylaws as scope of work because I'm just wanting us to be as creative as possible between now and the next meeting and come up with some fresh ideas. If we look at our existing work plan, we can kind of go through and look at some things which are ongoing and some things that we've actually achieved this year. With respect to the first one, which is addressing the Cove Peninsula stabilization, erosion, and reforestation of public lands, which was a City Commission milestone. The City Commission kind of dropped that one off their list, but I think they still want the NRC to provide advice and on these goals with respect to the Clackamas Cove and the ongoing reforestation of public lands.
Pete,
Yes.
I've got a question on this one. My understanding, which could be dated, is the previous developer, that his whole effort's kind of like inactive right now, if I'm correct.
His land use approvals have expired. That much I know. As
Wait,
far as development agreement with the city commission and those kinds of things, I couldn't really give you any status update on that.
Well, what I'm wondering is if our responsibilities or involvement varies depending whether or not there's a developer that currently, you know what I mean? Because there's not a development plan or something specifically going on. It seems like our involvement or recommendations would go down one path, and that would be a different path as opposed to if there's a developer that...
True. If you
Yeah,
have a...
it's my understanding that Randy Tyler and Ed Darrow are still involved. They came close to losing it, but the city looked at, how much more work is it going to be to,
Sure.
come up with another developer,
Right.
especially in this economic climate, and they are proceeding with them. I did tell him that he's jumped through more hoops than a circus lion on this subject already. So it's my understanding that it's still moving forward.
Yeah. So
And,
I would say, with the economic development director for the city, which is Eric Underwood, is still working with the developer to promote the project and those
Right.
kinds of things. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
As far as an active land use application coming across the desk that the NRC could be reviewing at this point, we don't have any.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So the
the peninsula stabilization is important because the long-term threat is for the river to break through that peninsula, and it almost did it once before. And every time we have high water, there's landslides and so on that, which is continuing to narrow that. And it just isn't that big a place. And with the area that got bulldozed a couple of years ago, the edge of it started to slump. The areas that they actually had run a bulldozer on, and the ground started moving below that and went all the way up into that area. So it's areas that on the surface seem stable, but they're not. And that whole thing is definitely threatened because it's natural for rivers to widen their course. And especially with that gravel bar forming there, that's routing the river around it and consequently right up against that entire bank. So that is a big issue that needs to be addressed by somebody with deep pockets.
Yeah,
May
and
not
I
be the
think-
city.
Yeah, the budget associated with providing a recommendation to the city commission by the NRC is relatively small.
Right.
But the overall project obviously is in scope is huge.
Yeah.
But if we wanted to keep this on the priority list and provide some tighter date for the NRC to put something together as some sort of a recommendation for future study, we could do that.
Yeah, I
as
could
well.
see recommending a study to come up with not just a potential solution for the issue, but a way of funding it, because, we can plan all we want, and without funds, we're not going to be just wasting our efforts. And we have to sound out the agencies involved, some of them, because it does impact anything that's happening in the cove quite a bit. Because if it does break through, it'll be depositing whatever it can in the cove, and there goes the cove.
From the previous presentations, though, isn't this whole issue or the site here part of the subset of what's going on with the railroad bridge? And it seems like the one impression I got from the presentations and other stuff is you almost have to treat the area as a whole. Considering what's happening with the railroad bridge and the bank up on the Gladstone side and the island and the peninsula, you can't really address one of these issues without taking the other aspects into account.
That's true. And I could update the body on what's going on with the railroad bridge. It's Metro is in the middle of choosing what projects to fund. They cut off public comment last Friday. There was 43 projects that are not going to all get funded, and one of those was doing an engineering study on that trolley bridge. And what they stated in their write-up was that they think that there isn't room for pedestrian and bicycle traffic on 99 entering Oregon City from the north, that they should reroute all of it over this bridge. And that would mean it would come out on Main Street, and the other end of Main Street is the Blue Heron site. And I mentioned that to the planners that have been hired to work on the Blue Heron site, and they thought that was really a neat thing, because that's drawing people all the way from Portland could go to Blue Heron on a paved path the whole way. That has enormous potential that could really be a benefit to Oregon City, I think. And
You mean recreational bike and ped traffic? Yeah.
Okay. Somebody, you could reasonably bicycle that distance and back to Portland.
Yeah.
Ties in with the whole Springwater corridor and all the other bicycle paths that are going into the Portland area.
That'd be a nice addition.
Yeah, so, as soon as I mentioned that possibility, that they were quite enthused over the possibility. I sent them the documents where Metro stated that they'd want to reroute the pedestrian and bicycle traffic, which is a major thing. But, of course, they haven't even done the study yet, so it's going to be years off before it happens. But still, it's, something the planners need to be aware of. Okay.
So if the railroad bridge is something that you want to continue to provide advice on,
if we have an opportunity to support doing it, I think we should.
Yeah.
So
Seems like that
list.
might fall under the active transportation
yeah.
coordinating.
Yeah.
Nice.
Good observation.
Okay, so the second activity that we had adopted was reestablishing the tree subcommittee and its scope of activities. And so we have a meshed committee. We have our tree subcommittee, NRC, which is kind of acting jointly as one. And we successfully did get our Tree City USA status this year, so we're not a founding member, but first year in the program, and then each year that we were in the program, we will need to resubmit our application, and we will be considered a continuing or growing community if we make enhancements and improvements to our Tree City USA program as we move forward. And that includes a variety of activities, such as getting better membership, better outreach, coordinating plantings with neighborhood associations and other groups and those kinds of things. So we can actually check that bullet off our list. Reviewing and updating the city street tree list and public tree list, I think we're really close. I think actually tonight, if I share with you some of the revisions that Brian and Eric have shared with me, I could almost ask for your recommendation to move forward with this if we just make those changes as staff. But I also understand if you want to see it one last time before we adopt. Reviewing and updating nuisance and native plant lists. We haven't really tackled this yet. We have talked about the Clackamas County Integrated Pest Management Plan and some of the lists associated with that.
Yeah, is the city making use of that plan?
Well, I wouldn't say no. It has not been formally adopted into any sort of specification documents and those kinds of things. So no, not formally. But yeah.
So what does it take to have that formally done?
I think it's a matter of communicating it to the various departments and through this. I think it would be as simple as providing a draft recommendation. We did a draft recommendation template for you all to kind of sign, and that would be an easy one. You could just say, and then we'll send that up to the city commission and put it in there on the next agenda. Yeah, and then they will say, Mr. Frazier, make it so.
I think it would be a good thing to, I don't recall if we've done it, but
Okay.
make sure all of us has at least a digital copy of that.
Okay,
And,
yeah.
then,
I've got it digitally, but I don't know
Yeah.
if everybody does. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a copy, but I got it from another source. So, the Clackamas River Basin Council is using it and so on, And we'll get everybody on the same page and the parks and everybody else
Right.
up to snuff with everybody else.
I can see it affecting the parks, obviously, stormwater management division, which is Eric Hand's division, and the summer crews that are going out and maintaining all of the stormwater easements and city-owned rights of way where there's storm drainage on either side. So those are obvious places where they could use it as a resource.
I'd suggest that we get it distributed to make sure everybody sees it and is aware of what it is, and then have it on the agenda next time around, and make a recommendation at that point.
Okay.
What's actually the accountability for using that list within the city? Is there a process for that, or? I mean, it's one thing just, to come up with a list and hand it out, but what's the accountability for making sure that it is used effectively?
I think it's I think with the Public Works Department, it's a matter of the Public Works Director advising his managers that this is a part of their protocols or best management practices, and they should be versed in it, and they would probably need to do some educational sessions with their staff so that they are familiar with the document and figure out what actions they're not doing. I'm not aware of any procedure in that because I don't work in those departments, but I'd be happy to send that to John Lewis and see what he says. I think if we can get that recommendation signed and sent up as quickly as possible, that would be the official way to do this. So that'd be good. Yeah.
Pete, does that IPM plan include an update to the nuisance plant lists?
I did it? I can't recall.
You mean the city's list?
Yeah.
Or I think it has its own lists in there,
The city would adopt it.
and we would adopt those. Yeah. So it's much more up to date than our current list. Yeah. Next one.
Excuse me, just
Yeah.
I think you said this, but on the lists, they would have to go to the city commission to be approved or first? Is that the
Yeah,
process?
through some resolution.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
all right.
and this is also on the homework idea list as well, as an ongoing item. Not adoption of the IMP, but policies and management for stormwater areas and those kinds of things. Anyway, I digress. So, third ongoing task is reviewing heritage tree and grove nominations on public and private land. We are currently working on amendments to the code in light of comments from the public at the last meeting, which need feedback from Clackamas County and ODOT. So we're still waiting on some feedback from those groups. But we'll bring that revisions back to you, and then until we have a readopted heritage tree code, any nominations will still be coming before you into the current code.
How long does it take to get approval from ODOT?
That's a good question. It can take a long time.
Yeah.
Just from working with them on trying to get tree plantings on gateway areas in the city in the past, it took about a year before we actually had a meeting with them, because and when we sat down and met with them, the issues that they raised with respect to this kind of thing are tied to their long-term planning for stormwater management in their rights-of-way, and their concerns about being subject to, additional environmental review if a local jurisdiction plants trees on their right-of-way for projects that they have in the pipe. And so they have all these very complicated concerns.
Is there a way to adopt a portion of the Heritage Tree Code that doesn't apply to the ODOT and the county portions, and just amend those in later?
Yeah, I mean, if it's something where, if we decide as a city that we are going to allow for nominations to occur on county-owned roads in the city limit, then one obvious way to include that agency is say, the application must have the consent of the agency on whose property you're nominating. And if they don't, then you're kind of stuck. You can't move forward with that. So it would basically take it back to only city-owned properties and city rights-of-way or private land within the city. And then you can adopt your amendments and not have to worry about waiting for ODOT to comment. Or
I think we should try and move some things forward, because waiting another year for an unknown is not really working very well.
Yeah, no. And this came out of the last meeting where a member of the public said, well, you should really be concerned about the legality of nominating trees on these rights of ways.
So is there language in the ordinance that we've looked at before that we then need to relook at that would allow us to pass it now with what's the change that needs to be made? Maybe we could review that at the next meeting.
Yeah.
So we could then take it to the city commission for their review
Yeah.
ASAP, hopefully before the summer is over.
Yeah, it'd be good. Yeah, sure. We will try to do that.
Now, do we need to fill out one of those little forms that you sent today in the mail in order for that to be on the agenda? I mean, or you make...
Well, no, it's up to you guys to, move something forward. The revisions that have been put before you at the last meeting included a completeness review process. And I don't think everybody's seen that yet, but it's basically allowing for timely review of the applications, like a land use application would. If we decide not to include the language for all these jurisdictions, we'd basically just go back to what we have plus a completeness review. So everything you've seen up to this date plus the completeness review part of it, and move it forward that way.
Do we have to make a motion to do that, or can we just say that's what we want to do?
Well, you can do
Well,
that.
I suppose technically we should.
Mhm.
Then let's.
Yeah.
Motion,
I make a
please.
motion. It's a big motion.
Okay.
I make a motion that we get the tree ordinance, the heritage
Yeah.
tree ordinance,
Yeah.
updated to take to the city commission minus the ODOT approval. However, we have to do it, review the language at the next meeting.
Are you happy not to see it again before, or you want to see the code as a group at the next meeting before you took?
We would
Yeah.
have to see it because the language is going to be
Could
changed.
Yeah.
we see it sometime
Yeah.
between now and the
Yeah.
next meeting, and then plan on
Yeah.
Oh,
voting at the next meeting?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's the motion.
Okay.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay.
With completeness review.
Yeah, if we could have a chance to look at it between now and then and make any recommendations. We can email in recommendations so that they get fed back to the whole board here before the next meeting. So let's just say if we could get us the previous code and proposed amendments that we already have emailed out to everybody as quickly as possible, and then in about 3 weeks have it further comments back to Pete. Okay? And anyone in opposition to that, or any more comments? And so hearing no further comment, I'm going to vote, say in the spirit of consensus, that we have approved that motion.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we got two things set up for the next IPM and the Heritage Tree thing.
Mm-hmm. Then we have the Cove, which we already talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, if it may be helpful at some point to have Randy Tyler give a presentation, or Ed Darrow, or both, so that we're aware of what's really going on with that from their viewpoint. I'm not sure if it's time for that at this point or not, but
Invite Randy and Ed Darrow to the next NRC meeting.
yeah, either the next or the one after that.
I missed a discussion talking about the grants and coordinating volunteer activities.
Yeah, we will.
We're
Getting there.
okay, because I heard you talk about the Cove again and stuff.
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah, we're jumping around. I agree.
All right.
Next one is making recommendations for a program to assist with tree planting in public areas and with consenting private landowners. This includes combination of incentives, grants, matching funds, and donations. Coordinating volunteer activities with groups such as the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, Friends of Trees, schools, etc., and reviewing nominations for heritage trees. So we have a great relationship with Friends of Trees, and they're very interested in starting a program here.
Maybe I've got some capacity issues. I guess I'm just trying to get a big picture kind of sense of this. Is recommendations for a program, to assist with this stuff. But I guess my question is the intent to have this program carried out by existing staff in addition to the duties already undertaking? Or are the members really this group? Expect it's kind of like who's doing this? Assuming
Well, my hope would be that we have a staff commitment associated with this, and a commitment from the City Commission for an additional staff member to help coordinate these activities in the long term. The way Friends of Trees works, and Eric's been in some of the meetings with them as well because of his position, they have 3 levels of commitment to a community based on funding availability. They will choose, they generally want to get a certain amount of buy-in from the neighborhood to plant trees. So and then they will fund up to a certain amount, and then the city provides a match. And then they either train a volunteer in the neighborhood to act as a long-term liaison and volunteer, or they just come in and they do it with their volunteers. So whichever model works best for Oregon City, we kind of have to make a choice. But this has not been up to the City Commission yet, and it's not a priority for the City Commission just yet.
It sounds like this group might be one that would want to share with the commission the need for this additional staff person if this was going to be a viable option. Because if it doesn't get funded, it doesn't sound like there may not be current capacity to do this.
Yeah, if you would, that would be great. Yeah.
There's also a partnership opportunity with the Soil and Water Conservation District. We're very interested in expanding an urban forestry component to the urban conservation program, and so if that's in the form of technical assistance or manpower or potentially funding to help bring Friends of Trees in for a program, I think that we're definitely interested in doing that.
Maybe a shared staff position? I'm just trying to see how it might be configured. Who
I don't know.
cares?
It's kind of early to
Sure.
get into the details on that, but I guess all I'm saying is that the interest is there from our end of things.
Yeah, and the interest is certainly there in my department.
Didn't the city have an interest in hiring an urban forestry type person last year? Or
Never heard
whatever
it.
happened to that process?
Well, our city manager still would like to see something along that line happen, either a city forester, urban ecologist, something in that direction.
Yeah.
But it's, there's been no concrete proposals made yet. But it's something that he's always ready to talk about, so.
The mitigation fund for street trees is a source of matching funds. In the situations where there's a 2-foot planter strip and a property owner does not want to replant in the planter strip, they have the option of paying fee in lieu of planting, and we put that into a tree bank, and we can potentially leverage that funds for urban reforestation with willing landowners, which is a big part of the program. Working with an incentive rather than a whip is often a much better idea.
Seems like we need a plan to really operationalize this or make it closer to reality.
Well, the nice thing about the Friends of Trees model is that you really don't. You can actually find a willing neighborhood and move in and move fairly quickly. Yes, I agree we need an urban forestry plan, but in the meantime, I don't think there's anything that stops us from working with Friends of Trees.
The Friends of Trees have a pretty well-established program that they can just roll out.
And they are looking at expanding into areas like Oregon City outside of Portland. So, I think it's a great opportunity.
They have had a big impact in Portland. Planted a lot of trees anyway.
Yeah, they do. There's a lot. And they provide significant discount to people too for the trees that are planted because of the funding that's in place.
Yeah, I had a question about your comment about the city manager. If the city manager would like to see, maybe like to see a position, what is the process? I mean, he's the city manager. Does he suggest that to the city commission, or what's the process exactly?
It's got to get a way of funding it. That's really what's holding it back, as far as I can tell. They don't have a lot of extra funds for a higher paid position, but they think they can do it at some point in time and not too distant future.
Yeah, I mean, when they approve their 2-year budget, is when they would find money for such a position, and they've.
Wouldn't a department have to, in a sense, host or sponsor that position because it'd have to be housed somewhere and have all the infrastructure support? So it almost needs a department champion to work with the city manager to make it more real. I
don't know if it comes out of the general fund or it's fee-based or some combination of both.
No, but essentially that person would be housed, as a staff person, they'd be housed within a
Right.
department.
Yeah, I mean, it would hypothetically, it could be in public works or in planning, and it would act as a liaison between the two, and then they would also work with this group as well as Parks and Rec. So that they may end up being, shared between 3 departments would be my guess. Yeah.
It sort of sounds like there isn't a champion to kind of follow up on what Bob is saying to support such a person.
I think they're
At this
still
point.
gathering information about what this position might do, and they're looking at options as far as sharing with other municipalities, like a regional specialist as well. So potentially West Lynn or Gladstone and Milwaukee could have a regional forester that would share between cities as well. All options are open. The PSU is just kicked off their urban forestry needs assessment, where they contact people directly in each municipality and ask them what their priorities are for urban forestry, and you get to rank your top 3 after doing a survey. So I was the person that responded to that survey this time around, and one of the priorities that I mentioned was funding and staff. And that will come back to the city manager as a report, so you can see where you sit in relationship to other cities in the metro area.
It almost seems like urban forester would be too narrow.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like it needs to be a more broad-based person to handle environmental issues for the city.
Yeah.
And I guess we've talked about that before in the past, but that's kind of the way it strikes me, because, that person could be talking about the cove, water quality issues, fish issues, wildlife, forestry, tree, issues, a lot of different things. And so it seems to me it needs to be kind of a broad background person.
So
or position.
what if our committee had a, I don't know what you call it, that we just took to the city commission, saying that we've discussed the issue and we think that if the city can in some manner, way, shape, or form come up with a position like that, that person who interfaces with our group and with what's actually going on the ground, that covers all of the broad environmental issues, is something that we advocate for, that we think is a really good idea. We'd like it to move up on the priority level. For one thing, one of the things that's not on this list, and I'm not sure how we get it on a list or where it belongs, but there seems to be a continuing lack of interconnectivity between the plans that are going through and the actions that are taking place on the ground, and the fact that this committee doesn't see those plans, doesn't know what those plans are until either after the fact or the day of or the day before some action is about to take place. So that part of our job, as I understand it, is to actually look at plans and advise or make comments if they are environmentally sensitive or, whatever the issue. So I think our committee could say we really would like to, these are the issues we see, we think this person could help in a number of different ways, and take that to the city commission to help them focus perhaps the need and what that job description would be, broader than a tree specialist.
Mhm.
Realistically, what budget cycle are we I'm just trying, because obviously the position has to be budgeted for or something like that. And looking at the plans right now, when would be a timely time for our input for which budget cycle?
I don't know, but I can find out. I'm not involved in the budget process. I have no knowledge or ability to find out at this, but I will certainly do that before the next meeting.
Because it seems like the budget process will kind of drive the decision making for the opportunities for input.
Yeah, I've gotten the impression in talking with city officials that they're hoping to develop the funds for a position like that in a couple of years, or roughly. nothing concrete, but that they felt they didn't have the money right now.
So in the meantime, who on city staff would be bringing us more of these?
Well, that's an issue unto itself. It is true that we're supposed to be reviewing things. I caught one, for instance, they had marked for removal, apparently marked for removal over half the trees at the end of the Oregon Trail in the parking lot.
Right.
And it's like, we should have been on something of that's a fairly good sized magnitude, and, maybe we should have been consulted, because we could, because it's definitely an environmental issue, and, there may be reasons to take out some of those trees, but
could I respond
maybe
to
not.
that?
Yeah, sure, go right ahead.
So Denise Kai sent an email about that, which I think I copied everybody on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the idea behind marking the trees was so that they could go out and look at the prioritization. They hadn't actually marked them for cut yet. They were just doing an inventory. I raised I raised your concern with Denise Kai, and she is she's invited I think and in one of those emails she said she'd be happy to meet with the NRC on site. So Jerry has been talking to her as well. This is one of those things where it's not a formal land use action, it's just like maintenance of parks that the Parks Department does. So I don't necessarily know about it, because I look at land use that's coming across my desk in a formal application. Tree cutting and maintenance on city parks traditionally has not been subject to review by any kind of advisory body or the City Commission or the Planning Commission or the NRC, but because it's just part of their procedure.
Well, that brings up something for me, like when I was reviewing the lighting ordinance, it exempts the city from its own standards, so to speak. And
I don't see how that would happen.
there's just a little section in there that says that it does not apply to City of Oregon City, what I read.
No, that's not right.
But the question that goes beyond that is maybe someone from the Parks Department could come and talk to us about our concerns, or we could have conversations about it, because as I see it, the Natural Resource Committee seeks not just to be involved in land use actions, but also in how the city manages its resources as well. I mean, we're part of that. We're not staff, but certainly if we had an opportunity to interface maybe with staff in a meeting and they come and tell us their policies, or we work out a situation where if something's going to happen, they can call one person on the committee, so that we don't end up in situations where all of a sudden we see 50 red flags on trees in one of the most visual places in town and wonder what's going on. It's just better communication.
With Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with respect to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee and the actions of the park staff, we belong at.
I would suggest that with our sheet here for potential revisions to the work plan, there's an opportunity down at the bottom for other, maybe we should add something about clarifying the communication channels with the NRC from the city, all of the different departments' perspectives, and just kind of clarify what expectations are, what's realistic, and have that conversation before we really move forward with too many other things.
An idea comes to me that we might be able to interface with the Parks and Recreation Committee and, I don't know, maybe some other staff members to review the changes that we have suggested for the Heritage Tree Ordinance and the other tree-related subjects, so they're brought up to speed with what we're doing, and at least we're all talking about the same thing. Because maybe the filtering process when it gets to them doesn't get to them, or they may think, well, it doesn't apply to us because we're not land use, we're city, and I just think better communication would be really helpful here.
I agree.
It kind of strikes me as that, we're an advisory committee, PRAC's an advisory committee, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
But then there's the maintenance part of the city that takes care of parks and so forth. So how does the maintenance part coordinate with PRAC? I mean, that would be a question in my mind. And now by ordinance, I believe we're supposed to coordinate with PRAC like one time a year or something. There's supposed to be one meeting, joint meeting
Right.
or something. But I'm not sure that that's really functional,
And, yeah, I agree with you, Richard. I attempted to coordinate a joint meeting between PRAC and NRC last year, and then again this year. And, I think it went to the extent where they were like, well, we'll talk to Brian, and then we'll figure out what we need to talk about. So I found it a little bit disappointing myself.
Why
So,
don't we, as a committee, go to the Park and Recreation Committee with a request for an agenda item as other citizens, and that what we would like to bring to them is a review of the tree ordinances and related subjects that we've been working on for the last 6 months and give them a report. So let's get ourselves on their agenda. And we
Okay.
can go as a group to their meeting with a presentation of what we've been working on.
Something might
Who would
be-
like to do that?
I wouldn't mind going, but I don't know, I'm not the tree expert, so.
Okay. I mean, I can help, but I'd like a representative.
Yeah, I think it might be hope for us that we need some additional information is, there was a whole thing about cutting of the cottonwoods down at Clackamas Park, and if that was like a park maintenance issue, kind of like at one level, and now we've got kind of like another parks tree maintenance issue at another site, and just trying to understand, is there some time if you get to a certain level of tree cutting or trimming, depending on where it takes place or how, when does it rise to a level that's more than just a maintenance issue?
Well, that's a good question
You
for
could
us
ask
to
them.
take to the committee and ask.
Mm-hmm.
Good question, great question.
Well, my impression anyway, reading the memo about the tree removal in the end of the trail parking area anyway, was while there seemed to be a lot of openness in accepting advice and some stressing that it was early on in the process and there was time to make changes. That didn't convince me that there was a process. I mean, my impression, right or wrong, was that these kind of maintenance actions are fairly ad hoc within the staffs of the two departments, I guess. And what's really missing is not that everybody needs to come and worship at the altar of the Natural Resources Committee. I mean, we're just one little advisory group. But it seems to me the problem is that there needs to be a much more specific process and a set of standards and goals that each of these outfits has to comply with when they choose to take an action. I mean, that's what it sounds to me like, which kind of brings me around 360 to, well, I agree 100% that let's reach out to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. Let's let them understand our concerns. Let's hear what their thinking is. That's a great way to start, I think. But it kind of tells me that probably the right answer in the end is to move ahead over the next year with a more comprehensive revision to the city's tree policies, urban forest management, so there is a set of standards and a process that everybody's supposed to be working toward. That's sort of what I get out of all of this when I think about it.
Isn't that sort of what we're doing piecemeal?
Well, that's why I was trying to pull this back to something
Yeah.
we're talking about here,
Yeah.
and it makes sense to me that would be a priority for us.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, we're only catching the things that are kind of obvious, like in the tree maintenance, like if somebody puts a bunch of flags, there could be another site where trees or branches come down, and if nobody's there to see it, do we even know what happened? I mean, that's
So on this list, we have, reestablish the tree subcommittee and its scope of activities, and we're reviewing the updates to the nuisance plants and the recommendations for trees, but maybe the overall heading is review of the city's tree ordinance policies. So we're looking at the whole thing as a unit as opposed to just piecemeal portions.
And then recommend provisions as appropriate or something.
Right.
Yeah, I think what you're dealing with in a nutshell there is small departments, limited staff, trying to do the right thing with limited money. And, they had found in that particular situation a lot of trees that were planted that were starting to grow together and crowd each other out. And they have hired Terry Flanagan to take a look at it and provide some recommendations. So I don't want to give you the impression that people aren't trying to do the right thing when they're maintaining parks. It's just that they're trying to do it on a very limited budget. I agree that to the extent that they can be transparent and notify people about the activities that they're doing, yeah, that'd be great. I think that's probably been lacking in the past. So, and that's something that needs some improvement.
Wouldn't you
Yeah.
agree, though, that basically PrAC and NRC need to be on the same page?
Absolutely.
And then PrAC is the one where the information filters down to the maintenance area parks. Is that correct? And
Believe
therefore,
so.
who's ever down there doing that maintenance, they need to be aware that,
I read their bylaws today, and it says, yeah, they have, advisory authority to give to staff and maintenance staff as well. Yeah, their bylaws don't include a similar provision that says, we'll have a joint meeting with the NRC. So they're kind of like, until I mentioned to those guys that we had a bylaw that said that, and they were like, oh, okay. It's kind of unilateral. But-
So I think like a review of the urban forestry program, I think that's a great long-term goal, but I think in the short term, having just a simple work session with representatives from NRC, PrAC, the city planning and parks departments, and just having a conversation about how we can communicate better, how PrAC and NRC can communicate better, share information. I think that's a start, just opening the communication channels, and then we can have long-term discussions about urban forestry programs and such. But it seems to me that it's just the communication that is kind of lacking right now, and it's the easiest one to fix.
Pete, I think too, at some point, just thinking about tree maintenance too, you can maintain trees for different purposes, shade, cooling off parking lots, wildlife habitat. But depending on what kind of goals you're managing for, I'm thinking, like if you're trying to deal with climate change with tree planting, maybe crowded trees and more trees are better than fewer trees. I think
Up to a point.
up to a point. But I think what I'm trying to say is, I think even looking at which goals which goals the maintenance are addressing and what kind of trade-offs they're willing to make for one set of goals versus another, just to be clear, because needs change, priorities change, and what may have been traditional or regular maintenance at one point may not be in the best overall interest of the environment or the city at this point or in the future.
Yeah, one of the issues is ways of approaching trees and groupings of trees, and there's the horticultural sense where each tree needs to be a prime specimen, and then there's the natural area approach where you want a forest, which the two are really different. And sometimes I suspect the park is applying more of that horticultural approach, and you need to do that when it's appropriate. But in other cases, you don't. You want to have a forest and a natural area, and we all need to be clear when those different criteria apply. And
I think it's some of our parks, and we're Clackamas Cove, for example, or not Cove, Clackamas Park, were developed in long prior to the Willamette River Greenway ordinance or the Natural Resource Title III regulations, et cetera. And so you're kind of dealing with these pre-existing situations, and they are slowly trying to manage them or bring the native species back in, rather than just the horticultural ornamental varieties. In fact, you can't, once you take out one of those other species, you can only use a native. And so that's part of the education process for the parks guys. And they are actually working on a pre-app for renovation of the RV facility down there at Clackamas Cove. So that's going to be a land use application that we'll bring before you,
Okay.
because it's going to have new landscaping and some.
Yeah.
I don't know at this point if it involves actual alteration of the parking areas or anything like that. It's very preliminary, but it is entirely within the natural resources review. So.
We'll see that when we see it, I guess.
Well, they've asked for a preliminary meeting before a pre-app, and we're like, well, we have to have a pre-app, so we'll do a preliminary meeting, then we'll have a pre-app.
All right. Pre-app.
Yeah.
Question or a comment on Shaw's comment.
Yep.
On land use applications and so forth. Basically, we don't really have a role there for the most part.
Well, that's not quite true. Your bylaws state that you can comment on land use applications that significantly affect or significant natural resources or have the potential to. So hypothetically, in my mind, we have a discussion, we have to say what is a significant natural resource and agree on what that is and what the threshold is for a land use application that affects that. I mean, we've got the Title III and Title 13 regulations in the overlay districts that affect landslides, geology, and stream protection. So those are natural. Wherever a natural resource application is going to be actually reviewed against the criteria is when we would bring it before the NRC.
Have there been any in the last year or two?
They have not.
Okay, so the point, I think, is that there's not a role for us, really, to review a lot of applications. Not that we want to, but, so where do you go with that, Sean?
Well, that's sort of like the implementation of policy, as opposed to policy making, which is where you're actually revising codes that you're going to use to review land use applications. So it's like policy making and then applying policy. The land use review is like applying policy. Making policy is sort of one of those important areas where you're doing code revisions on tree regulations and those kinds of things. Welcome, Jerry.
Jerry.
Hi. I have a new set of contact lenses. I have not had contacts for 20 years, and you all look different.
We look older than we do.
You look older, right?
I can actually see you, but whereas most of the time you're kind of, I'm in a fog. You already knew that, so.
Good for you. Good.
Maybe we can get a little bit caught up with where we are with
All
Jerry.
right.
Jerry, we're just going through our existing goals and priority list.
Okay.
I've handed out a homework sheet for suggested revisions to the work plan, and I'd
Okay.
like to get comments back by June 20th
Okay.
or thereabouts.
All right.
On what your priorities are as an NRC individual member and what you think we need to do to reprioritize our current work plan.
Do you have extra copies of that?
Oh, didn't you get one, Jerry?
Oh, he got one, but I didn't, so
I don't have one of
I got
those.
extras.
Yeah. But, yeah, no big deal.
Here's one.
Oh, thank you.
Oh.
Got another one over there?
Thank you.
You have one more?
Well,
Yeah, now we're good.
Put out 7.
And I also didn't get a copy of the city's plan.
Are you sure?
Positive, I went through it 3 times.
I put out 7
It's
packets.
stapled.
I guess they weren't collated.
City Commission goals and priorities.
It's the one that's stapled together?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, I went through it, because that's why I
Oh.
borrowed Jerry's.
Oh.
Is this what you're looking for?
Anything, I can email these to you as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, I didn't get this one. Thanks.
So on the other side of our current priority, we have establishing a public education outreach program. And the date on that, we had a spring 2012, but my recommendation would be to make this an ongoing goal because it changes with needs and time. Some of the ideas we had for this are, and do are regular articles in the Trail News, hosting an agency roundup day and updating the city website. I'm working on, I do have a website up, and I don't have all the links and topics categorized or made yet, but I'm going to launch it in the next few days, and you can give me plenty of feedback on that. That'd be great. It's basically it's linked to the NRC's homepage, and it would state, NRC information and links, helpful information and links. And as we expand that website, we can explain, better how different agencies and groups coordinate within Oregon City. Next one is the climate change and carbon mitigation program that Bob has been working on pretty hard to date, and I've put this down as a priority issue so you can help me with
I think
that.
probably should be considered ongoing too.
Mm-hmm.
Pete, the one request I've got on this is just kind of like the stuff with the tree maintenance, is if the city's
Yeah.
undertaking climate change related activities, or even if it has stuff to do with the fleet or other things, it'd be great to get updates like that, wherever's taking place in the city, just so we understand, what the city's up to or what directions it's heading, so we can, complement those activities.
Okay. The fleet management guy is a young guy in Public Works named Dan Hepner, and he'd be the best contact for us to coordinate with on that.
I was just, picking
Yeah.
that at random, but there's other things the city's doing.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent they cycle in better, lower emission vehicles into the fleet, and what kinds of lubricants and oils they try to use to minimize their impact and hydrocarbon use and that kind of thing. But they do have some programs in place. I don't know the status of them just yet, but that'd be good. Mm-hmm.
What does active transportation mean?
Good question. Active transportation is the term used in the transportation system plan update for bicycle, pedestrian, human-powered, and they also include transit in that, even though we're primarily talking about public transportation. Anything that will, reduce single occupancy vehicle use
Okay.
within and outside of the city. So this is a big focus of the current TSP update, to try to create more opportunities for people to walk and bike places rather than rely on their vehicles. There's a land use component associated with this as well, because generally quarter mile is the area. There's a sort of a rule of thumb of quarter mile is the area which people feel comfortable walking to get services and goods. So a lot of our land use policies are geared towards trying to mix uses and create slightly higher density and appropriately scaled commercial in areas so that people can get what they need within a shorter distance. and try to reduce all those trips to Costco and Walmart that people make, often outside the city, just to get their needs met. It's not necessarily easy to combine a land use component with an active transportation component, but they are very interrelated because you're talking about bringing new types of land uses and higher density types of land uses into existing neighborhoods. And so there's a natural sort of aversion to that if you've moved to an area because you like how it is today and it's low density and rural feeling. And then the city proposes a 20-year or 30-year land use plan that shows commercial and right next to you. And so there's a lot of times an aversion to that, and it's an educational process.
How does this one fit with the charges, though, of this committee?
Yeah,
I mean,
of this
it's a big
committee?
important issue.
Yeah. I think to the extent that there are, the Transportation Advisory Committee oftentimes hears safety concerns, largely hears safety concerns, and such to do with stop signs and those kinds of things. I think it would be beneficial if they also heard from groups like the NRC that there is a component of transportation that has to do directly with the environment and reducing impacts on the environment, and that you would recommend to the TAC certain types of actions or recognition of existing city policies and comp plan policies that promote these types of transportation modes. So,
Yeah, and it's certainly if you encourage foot and bicycle traffic, you're getting people out of cars, which reduces emissions and so on. So there is an environmental impact due to that.
yeah, certainly.
I'm just trying to understand the role we could play here. I mean, I agree. It's an important thing, and it's one I'm interested in for that matter. But what would be the piece we would pull together?
Well, it's things like the trolley bridge. We could encourage that, but we're not going to be involved with planning the bridge or outside of what are you going to do with the surrounding area, perhaps. But, it's more the concept, it would be good to do this sort of project idea and suggest maybe specific ones like the trolley bridge.
Make a list, you mean, of different ideas of that sort?
Yeah, that'd be one possibility, or comment on other people's lists and so on, but, encourage people to give people ways to get out of their cars and still get places.
I have a suggestion maybe that's related to the current transportation system plan update, because I believe one of you is serving on the transportation system plan. Or, sort of.
Early in the process.
Yeah. Well, it's moving forward with the city commission, and it's close to adoption, but not quite yet. So it might be helpful if Laura Turway shared the most recent draft, or we shared the most recent draft of that plan with you. It's on the website, and has a list of projects. And the idea is that it's a fully functional transportation system plan, and it identifies needed improvements for the fairly long term for vehicle, bicycle, and ped, and it identifies which of these improvements are funded and which ones are not. And the idea is that the prioritization for the ones that are funded in the near term, and then as grant funding or federal funding or match funding comes up in the future, we can refund the ones that are not on the currently funded list. And it's an update to our 2004 transportation system plan. So it has a lot more specificity in it with respect to bicycle and pedestrian improvements and where those should go in the city, and I guess where there are gaps in the system, sidewalks and other ways. So that's good, because it allows us to focus in on what areas, for example, what areas of development can correct, or what areas the city is going to have to correct through some other mechanism. Or not correct necessarily, but bring up to speed, bring up to snuff. So,
So our top 1 through 10, we can add other suggestions there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention, we did state that we want to encourage the city to adapt the county IPM Integrated Pesticide Management Plan.
Yes.
And we also voted that at the next meeting, we're going to vote on the heritage tree amendments. And that's going to be forwarded to us right away
Okay.
by email.
All right.
And get our comments back in about 3 weeks to Pete in time for the next meeting.
Okay. Is the IPM consideration something we're voting on? Is that what I heard you say?
We're
Or
voting,
advancing.
we already voted on to
Okay.
and approved
I remember that.
that we want to forward that to the city, and we want to familiarize ourselves with it a little more before
Okay.
we actually
All right, good.
physically do that.
All right.
And the city needs to formally adopt that as part of their process of maintaining properties. So, and we also talked about the Friends of Trees and using them to help expand the urban forestry program here in the Oregon City area. And they're quite willing to do that, and they have an established program
All right.
that they can just roll out.
Mm-hmm.
And Soil and Water wants to work in concert with them as well, which could be really a good thing.
So you're discussing other things that we could focus some
Yeah.
attention on.
Yeah,
I'd like to.
these are basically things that should be on the
All
list,
right.
but we've already
Right.
voted to move ahead on
Okay.
both of those.
Good.
Do you have some additional things?
Yes, I feel strongly that we need to have a little workshop with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife or somebody of that nature about how we diversify and then manage municipal landscapes. I'm talking about the urban interface here. What I'm speaking to is there's a lot of groomscaping going on every place in some of these native establishments that have been put in the city because that's how people think they should be maintained. But in fact, they need to have more structure, I think, more wild attitudes in some cases. And I think it'd be neat to have Elizabeth, your friend, Ryan, come and
Okay.
spend some time with us and explain to us, and then maybe us sponsor a workshop for the staff of the city that interfaces with all these water management facilities and so forth. Some of them are being groomed now, and that wasn't their purpose. And in some other areas, a lot of the municipal boulevard plantings that were put in as native plantings are now being maintained and boxed. How do I say this? Pruned heavily. And maybe that's the intention, but that wasn't the designer's intention, I don't think. So I feel strongly that the urban environment is not just people's. That when we start saying the municipal environment is just for people, unfortunately, municipal areas control a lot of the state right now, especially in the Willamette Valley. So if we can include, through understanding, through some encouragement, ODF&W and others in the process of suggesting ways to manage these areas, I think it would be helpful. So I called it municipal groomscaping and diversifying the municipal habitat.
Are you talking about city maintenance?
No, I'm just talking about in general. I'm specifically talking about city municipal areas, such as 7th Street, okay? Or down there by into the Oregon Trail Freeway, a lot of the boulevard plantings that have been put in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Anyway, we can. That's just a suggestion I'm putting into the mix, okay?
Yeah, okay.
But you're not talking about privately held land?
Well, I would like to see that done too, right? Seems like.
Why I brought it up is why there
Yeah.
might be a link there. Maybe
There should be.
that one kind of fits with the educational major
Yeah,
too, because that's
sure.
really how you do the one on private lands.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
The last few items on the existing list were Earth Day 2013, which,
Pete, I've got a little bit of input on that one.
okay,
I think one of the things, having participated in Earth Day, I appreciate your involvement over at the Environmental Learning Center, is our event was really lightly attended. I think there was a second event that was canceled in Oregon City due to lack of attendance and things. And I'm wondering if this committee might be able to help encourage maybe things get kind of dispersed, everybody kind of does their own thing, and maybe the overall public perception might be just kind of a mishmash, kind of like a stew or something like that. It seems like maybe there's some kind of coordination or something going on so that people aren't kind of tripping over each other or splitting the pie so much that, some events or things get starved. I guess it's a free market. People go where they want.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was going to say. It was like
but
the
it
solve
still
there,
seems
know?
like it seems like there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah. Well, at least in terms of NRC's participation, it would be nice to get a little more promotion. I mean, I don't think you can ever stop somebody from going where they want on Earth Day and cleaning up a particular section of their town, but judging by all the projects that are advertised on Earth Day through Solve, you have your pick. But I agree, it would be nice to have a more coordinated activity for next year, and use as many departments and resources as we can to try to get people in one place. If it works better to do it in a different location than EUT, we can look at that as well. But I'd be happy to work with you on that.
I would, just based on our experience doing outreach at the Soil and Water Conservation District, having an event and asking people to attend, we generally receive really poor attendance doing it that way. Where we've had the most success is taking our events or our message, our workshops, to a specific audience, a packaged audience who wants us there. People are incredibly busy, and in this area, luckily we have a lot of different options and events going on. We have the opportunity to attend a lot of them, but that does pull your potential audience in a lot of different directions. And so it's really about taking the message to your audience rather than having them come to you.
Good point.
I think you're always setting yourself up for disappointment in terms of attendance if you do it that way.
Are you able to tie that into like holiday events? I'm trying to say, I understand about going to the audience, but are you able to work that into like event days or holidays or things where people are focused on different topics?
We usually coordinate our outreach events with particular projects we're working on. So if we're installing a rain garden at a school, we're having rain garden workshops coordinated through the school with teachers, staff, parents. So that's how we approach it.
I think, in terms of this year, an example might be Clackamas Cove, where the Code Enforcement Department organizes their cleanup down there. And we just insert ourselves into that activity and set up a booth right next to theirs. Kind of laid out, because there were a lot of people there, and there were really a lot of people down talking. They were done cleaning up, but they were standing around enjoying food and refreshments and talking about the natural environment, which is a great opportunity. So So good points.
It may be that giving a talk at the Greater Oregon City Watershed Group would be a good thing to do, because there's certainly an interested audience. And there's bound to be other groups. Some of the business groups may be good.
Well, I think the Oregon City Business Alliance group that Shaw spoke to would be an excellent group to focus in on, again, since they're 1/3 of their charter is to work to advance the natural environment. And she did that effectively.
Yeah.
And I think they're waiting for more.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun.
At least I hope they are. They're basically a Chamber of Commerce type group that's focusing on economic development, and they're looking for input. And one of their goals is to interface with the natural environment in an effective way, which I found kind of surprising, which is good.
Great.
Very good.
Okay.
And that's essentially it, other than ongoing activities. per our scope of activities in our bylaws. So on the backside of your suggestion sheet, I provided some examples, and we've already talked about most of these, in fact, as our potential action items that you could use to help you, categorize your priorities. So, if we want to move on from the work plan,
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
okay.
So we have the approval of draft street tree list revisions.
I didn't include the list because there are some additional comments that I got, and I would like to incorporate them before I come back with a final list from you. But if you want to wait for that, they include the comments from Brian with respect to inclusion of some of the natives, as well as some other great comments, which I think we need to update the list for because of the growth patterns in the local area. For
Yeah.
some of these, yeah.
Okay.
Is that something that needs to be reviewed by the entire committee again?
Um,
or-
Well, I know you're kind of tired of looking at this list. And I'm comfortable enough with the comments that I've gotten from Brian and Eric that I could move this forward without bringing it back to you. And I would just communicate via email with the group, and you'll see it, but we won't. If you're willing to make a recommendation for approval of it with the revisions suggested by Brian and Eric, as they agree on, then we're done with this and we can mark it on our list. So, yeah.
So our choice would be either recommend approval now or wait to see the final project
Yeah. those are-
next time around.
Next
So
time.
we can go either way.
yeah. Mhm.
I make a motion to recommend approval now.
Second.
Okay. Now, is there further discussion on this?
Only want to say that I really appreciated the two of you making the comments you did, because none of the rest of us knew what to say, and they were really excellent comments.
Well, I think your comments were good because you were like, well, we don't want native trees to drop off the list entirely. So what I've tried to do is make it very clear in the street tree list that we promote native trees. And there are some that are on the list, and the larger species that are on the native tree list, we recommend, being planted in a specific area, either behind a sidewalk or in a private yard and those kinds of things.
Asterisks by this?
Yes, got an asterisk.
Oh, good.
Lots of those. Asteroid. I'm not sure.
Asterize.
Is that a real word?
And then we'll have updated links to the most current list that we have. So, the Oregon State University website, horticulture, and Metro. I don't think you have to pay for the Metro list, but Portland plant list. So you can reference multiple places for the species. Great.
Okay.
Did Shaw's comments about evergreens being considered important, did that somehow get reflected? Okay.
Yeah, well, that's kind
Okay.
of what I'm saying. Evergreens and conifers and native species
Okay, I didn't hear that.
are. Basically what I've said, there is a sentence there. We promote native species. We have a native plant list. We want to be careful that they're planted in the right place. Either behind the sidewalk, not in a 2-foot planter strip necessarily, or a 3-foot, but in the right place, certainly. And then we provide a link to extra information about those species and how to plant them.
I just realized I was going to recommend adding the native chinkapin from up in the Cascades. I forgot to do that on those comments.
Okay.
That'd be one more item.
You mentioned that at previous.
I think I did.
Yeah.
So,
What's the species?
Chinkapin is the
Castanopsis.
common name. I forget.
Castanopsis chrysophylla, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
I'm surprised you don't add snowbush to it.
What?
Snowbush.
No bush.
It's a large shrub.
Oh, that's a bush.
Well,
A little bit too bushy.
that chinkapin's pretty bushy
This is,
stuff. I like it.
this is
Good.
a total aside to everything, but the salmon berries are absolutely the best this year that they have ever been. They're rich and sweet and luscious and everywhere in the woods.
Right.
Well,
So,
I'm waiting for the thimbleberries. So.
Yeah, good to know. Well, thank you.
Okay, so I consider that approved, and we'll look for the changes.
All right. Next up is NRC member reports.
Correct. Anybody have any comments on projects they're working on?
yes.
Okay, go right ahead.
Well, in my lighting ordinance review, I did talk to the gentleman from the International Dark Sky Association Board of Directors who used to live in Westland. I called him up, and he now lives in Davis, California. But we talked about the ordinance, and he brought to mind something very specific that he thought we might consider in the future of reviewing this ordinance, is that the lighting has 3 subsections where you have already a pre-existing heavily built up downtown like we have on Main Street, and then you have a less strict or restrictive or specific lighting ordinance for that area. And as you move further and further out towards the dark lands, towards the open spaces, your lighting becomes more and more, I'm not going to use the word restrictive, but it's really just less invasive, so that you don't try to apply those really, really, really restrictive lighting designs that you would put in a new neighborhood to an old neighborhood, because it's really difficult and challenging to do that. But so I thought that was kind of an interesting comment, so that there's not a
Yeah.
lot of resistance. It's just as you keep expanding and as you move out to the perimeter of your development areas, that you really are very, very considerate of what you're doing with your lighting. So he suggested like 3 separate subsections, degrees, if you want to call it that, of the lighting ordinance. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so the most intense management would be where closer to the dark areas.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and always you want to not like put spotlights up into the sky, but
Yeah.
the obvious. But you don't want to have to retrofit your entire downtown area.
What about just as places are remodeled to
Very good.
yeah
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
that into place at that point rather
Right.
than
Right.
asking everybody to upgrade. So,
Right.
okay.
So that's as far as
Okay.
I've gotten. But that was interesting. At least he was on
Does
board.
anyone know here whether, regarding Shaw's interest in the dark sky, mine too, the Cove has had any considerations about that within design? Has it got that far?
Yeah, we talked about that already. But you mean designs?
Yes.
Oh,
Selection of fixtures, whatever.
well, what we clarified was that the economic development director is working with Randy Tyler and Ed Darrow on, moving the project forward from that department. But the land use review part of it is not being reviewed right now. It's expired, and they would need to resubmit. So, they can talk about design with the NRC potentially, and one of the ideas was we would invite Ed and Randy to an NRC meeting to talk
Okay.
about this proposals, and then the land use review portion of it we'll deal with when it happens. Yeah.
Seems
Jerry,
like-
were you talking about the lighting?
Yeah, lighting
Yeah,
specifically.
lighting
It seems like a real opportunity to test out some of these things that,
Right.
Shaw's
So,
interested in, and I am too.
I would really
Go
like
ahead.
to have the opportunity to have a meeting of whoever wants to come, and I don't know if you still have a slide projector at the city, but I have slides.
No, it violates the lighting code.
Okay, fine. I'll find another format. But from a layperson's point of view, it would be really nice to just share the information about just the basics of what this actually means, and that, it's how simple it is to apply, and especially the parts about safety, which I think people don't understand, that
Oh,
the
yeah.
brighter the light does not necessarily mean the safest of the environments. So I'd love to do it. It only takes like 10 minutes, and it would be part of some...
Do it at an NRC meeting or what?
I don't know if you have a work session where
Yeah,
different
PC, yeah.
people
planning commission.
meet, planning commission, city commission, anyone interested. So the whole group
Yeah.
understands just the basic, simple principles. Because I'm not going to get into the placement of, so many volts per, not going there, just.
Are
It's-
there any other nearby jurisdictions that have adopted a code like this that they could come and share their
I'll
experience
find
with
out.
that?
I'll
Mm.
find out. I think the gentleman that was the partner of the man who moved to Davis is in West Lynn, so I can call him. and get
Does the
some-
planning commission have a work session coming up?
Generally, I will check. They're usually called as needed, so, yeah.
But that would be a good time, I think, wouldn't it? Is that where you're,
As needed, yeah.
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 Gee, Shay, if you wanted to do a field trip, the city of Hilo are great people to talk to about urban lighting policies. They've been worried for so many years about light pollution for the Mauna Kea observatories. And they have some really tough, hard-hitting stuff.
Is that the
The
suburbs?
city would spring for a field trip like that.
Yeah, we
wouldn't they?
could go on a field trip.
Pete's in the budget, isn't it?
Oh,
Well, if we want to look at an example, Sun River is such an example. They have an observatory over there that's very important. They've had to retrofit everything to meet the needs of that use. And I think we could probably gain something by all of us going to Sun River. That's the first thing.
Jerry, you know how you have the trolley, and we get on the trolley and we take our tours, and sometimes we're
Yep.
looking at this or that. It would be kind of neat to do a nighttime trolley tour where we look at examples of all the things they're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
good and bad.
Yep, you're right.
Because at nighttime's the only time you really see it. So I think that would be kind of something that we might start it off with a 10-minute presentation, and then we go outside and we look at the examples.
Yeah. I love
We
the
wouldn't have to
trolley.
go far.
Good, good.
Then we
Very
could
good.
have pizza or something. Or
That
cookies.
Sounds fun.
Cookies.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it should be
Trolley
fun.
tour.
Whatever we do should be fun.
Should
That's good.
put that in the bylaws.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So you. why don't you go
Yeah, I was
ahead?
say, it's kind of interesting. There's a group out of Southern Oregon. It's the excuse me, I just forget their name right now. It is Oregon Climate Action Network. And it's interesting, they actually had a day at Salem where they're educating and promoting legislators about a carbon tax in Oregon to go ahead and integrate the cost and impact of carbon emissions into the cost of products, goods, and services. And it's kind of interesting. They were able to meet with about 40 legislators, and they're planning kind of a statewide effort to, support a study bill and possible adoption of a carbon tax. So it's kind of interesting. It's not officially part of the agenda of this organization, but that was a good informational update.
Is it a bill yet, or?
Well, I think there's two bills, but there's also a study bill.
Okay.
And one of them is this kind of thing. What's actually interesting is British Columbia has adopted a carbon tax. And what's kind of fascinating is after some initial resistance or concerns, people seem to be kind of behind it broadly. Right now, they just see that it will make better informed consumer decisions because the costs more accurately reflect the full cost of production plus the impact. So, it gives better signals to the market.
Interesting.
I have a quick little report or observation, really. in an effort to make myself smarter on some of these urban tree issues, since I've been kind of behind the curve compared to some of you. I've been trying to do a little reading and scouting around, and as those of you who follow this stuff more than I are well aware, the City of Portland's been in the middle of a major revision of their tree codes, and so I've been reading up on that a bit. But what I was going to mention, for those of you who haven't noticed it, is there's been a couple of pieces on the editorial page of the Oregonian in the last week that are worth reading. The Oregonian, about a week ago, eBoard itself released a fairly critical editorial attacking the tree code revisions as complicated and expensive. And today, Merrill Reddish, who I understand is the chair of the Urban Forestry Commission of the City of Portland, wrote a very well-written and articulate rebuttal opinion piece that's in today's opinion piece in the paper, and it's worth reading for those of you who are trying to follow these issues.
Merrill
I
Redditch.
brought a copy here if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Wow.
That one,
It's both editorials. I stapled them together.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you're the one that brought to my attention and others this issue down at the end of the Oregon Trail.
Yeah,
Are we going to
did
discuss that?
Yeah, we did
Did
discuss
you
that.
what are we going to go on a tour or something? Or what are we
Well,
going to
that's still in the process, but we need to, yeah.
do? Okay.
Yeah.
so what's
Uh,
your,
we-
what's your concern, Jerry? Maybe you
Well,
wanna
my
talk about
concern
it
is he
sooner.
brought it to my attention, then I went down and looked.
Yeah.
And I see,
Well,
according to Brian, half the trees are going to be removed.
yeah, well, I counted, there's more than half are marked, but what Pete was sharing with us is that those are marked to be studied rather
Okay.
than marked to be removed.
Right. But in the commentary I saw from the staff of the Parks and Rec Department, I thought there was an offer to let us walk through and
There
take a
was.
look.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I would
so
suggest
we
we
can
do
follow
that.
that up on. follow
Yeah,
up
we
on
don't
that.
have a scheduled date yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a good thing to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Great.
Okay.
No, thanks for bringing it up again, though, Jerry.
right.
Yep.
I would like to talk about the October 5th Heritage Tree Fall Foliage Tour, which I'm trying to finalize. Did you already talk about that?
No.
Okay. And what we were trying to do was bring people together in a manner. We were hoping to use a trolley. I don't think that's going to be possible necessarily. I'm not sure. Maybe you know more about that now. But to take people on a Saturday exploration in the fall, to look at fall color, why plants color up trees, and then look at some of the significant trees that this group, I guess, has been advocating for preservation, and look at the tree code as it applies to the city.
Yep.
I don't have all the details together, but one of the issues was, could we get a vehicle to do this? And the trolley is not quite running too good. They have one trolley left running, sort of, and the other ones are not in too good a shape, and it may be by September they're all sold. Is that what you heard?
Yeah, that was the last I heard, was that if they would know by December whether they were going to auction it or not. And if they don't, then it may still be on the table, but we don't. No promises. The alternative is getting a bus rental. And there's a good company called Eco Shuttle we used for the South End concept plan, and they were fairly reasonable and gave us a 3-hour tour for the price of about $350, not including tips. But I ran that up the flagpole with my boss and asked if there were funding available for that, and he kind of gave me a nod.
Good.
But our budget for advisory committees, which includes Parks and Rec, Historic Review Board, and the NRC, which are the groups that the planning department looks, is about $8,000 between all of them. So we do have to kind of keep an eye on it. But that's good to know, because I didn't know that before. But it looks positive, and I'll keep.
How big a vehicle is that?
Good question. I think it's about a 20 seater, so it's not a big
Okay.
one. Yeah. Yeah.
because I was getting quotes from Blue Star. Brian and I were on a tour with the
Yeah.
whatever, Ice Age Flood Institute, and that bus that they had 44 passenger for 9 hours of contact time was $450, which is really a good
Oh,
deal.
that is good. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
okay. So that's a wonderful thing that you at least got approval to consider something. So what I was hoping to do is try to bring a draft agenda of what the day would look like. And this would be open to the public. Of course, we'd all hopefully be involved in it. I did this years ago for the Oregon City cleanup that I led effort. I did that for 7 years. And we spent time looking at fall foliage and why trees color up, the whole ecology of why that happens, which was kind of neat. People enjoyed that. And then we looked at some trees, but our main objective was to look at environments. And at that time, we looked at the erosion going on in Clackamas Cove, the peninsula, and we looked at other things. I'm not suggesting that broad. I'm suggesting more, explain our tree code and the work we've been doing on it, and then look at some things in the field, I guess.
Yeah, visit some of our heritage trees, visit the EOT potentially, or some of our natural resource areas. And,
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably a
Yeah,
3-hour
Clackamas
run,
Cove.
I would say, maybe 4 hours at the most,
Would be a fun activity.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and the only time I've really got for this, I'll be honest with you, is Saturday, October 5th, because I've got some other tours I'm leading. But that's a good time for fall foliage and color up, and then the weather gets worse. Historically, is my experience. So, okay.
I've already reported on the trolley bridge,
Okay.
and I wanted to mention the triathlon that's happening on, let's see, what is it, 25th or 23rd?
I'm not sure.
Sunday's the 23rd.
Sunday's the 23rd, so it's the 23rd, and they're going to swim a zigzag course through the Clackamas Cove, out into the Clackamas River, and pull out at Clackamas Park, at which point they'll get on bicycles right out to Carver and back, and then run up the stairs and down the Singer Hill Road and back to Clackamas Park. So they have around 250 people, and that's huge for a first-time event.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and they think in comparison to other ones that started out at 100 are now 900, so
Yeah.
this could become a really large event. And
Yeah.
I've talked with the main coordinator and reviewed the plans that they have. They have a pretty good traffic plan, it looked like, and they've gotten all the agencies involved, so
Who's hosting this?
it's just an ad hoc group that wanted to do it, basically. I think there is a Friends of Clackamas Cove that has formed that's a nonprofit that wants to make sure that the cove is used for human-powered sports rather than powerboats, because the two aren't real compatible. But they have dozens of people at a time down there practicing for this event, and that practicing is going to be going on year-round. So this is a huge boon for Oregon City, because it's bringing a lot of people in.
It's great.
And there's going to be spectators on top of the participants, and they're all going to go eat lunch somewhere in Oregon City, hopefully. And I think I suggested a tie-in in the future with Blue Heron once it gets redeveloped, and they thought that was a good idea. But of course, they have to actually. He said they'd have to actually enlarge, lengthen the thing to do that, because it's so much further down than just making it to the stairway, and especially if you go through the whole site. But it's something that has a lot of potential, I think. So anyway, and they have had the water tested in there, and the good news is that it's really clean, which is surprising considering that Gladstone took their water intake out of commission because of pollution of the groundwater. But I think that may have been because they're pumping and pulled the pollution to them. And maybe it's really deeper underground or something. But the surface springs that we think are in the cove evidently are pretty clean. So that's a good bit of news.
Great.
Is this an event that Doug and I should be involved in terms of swimming and running and so forth?
If you want to do that much exercise, you can volunteer to help with it. they're actually going to pay nonprofits if they deliver volunteers to help with the event. They'll funnel some money to the nonprofits. The Clackamas River Basin Council is taking part in that. They think they can get 15 people there, and that'll be I don't know what the money is. I haven't been in on that discussion, but it's a nice way of sharing.
So explain the route again. They will get
Well,
to
they're
the park.
gonna do like an S curve through Clackamas
yes.
Cove, out past your property,
Yes.
into the Clackamas River, go up the boat ramp, jump on their bicycles, go all the way out to Carver
All the way to Carver.
and back.
Okay.
And then they'll run through downtown Oregon City and up the stairs, which you're familiar with,
Right.
and then down Singer Hill.
And then back to the park where their bicycles
Right.
are. I see.
So what's the total distance?
I don't know that.
Gotta be 6 miles to Carver, isn't it?
Well, past my house, it's over 5.
Okay.
So then you've got half a mile to the highway and then into Oregon City. So it's over 6 miles, I'd say. Closer to 7.
Each way.
Each way, yeah. So it's a 14-mile bike ride by itself isn't a whole lot. That people go 100 miles sometimes or more. But they've got all 3 events that each participant will be undertaking. I was down there the other night walking my dogs, and these 2 women in wetsuits walk up. So I sort of did a little interview and got their impression of what's going on and all that. And they're quite enthused, and they think it's a wonderful place, and and it's all benefiting Oregon City, that's for sure.
Well, I think, the more people that swim, the more impetus there is to keep that cove a clean,
Yeah.
green place, which is great.
I strongly suspect that, given the cost of keeping it open for boat traffic, that it's by far the best way to go. And it's obviously going to pull in a lot more people too. So, one thing I've thought of in combination of all these different things is, if they do the trolley bridge, it's going to be a major human-powered transportation hub that might even look at going from. I think they were going to put in 12-foot paths through the Cove development. They might want to even look at slightly bigger ones, 15 or 16 feet. Because it could potentially have a lot of traffic on it, especially if it's promoted. Because the falls would be a wonderful destination for people on a day bike ride, from Portland, and that's quite doable.
What day was that again?
Sunday the 25th, I think. 23rd. Sunday the 23rd.
June?
Yeah, this month.
Okay.
Oh, my.
And they have a website somewhere. I couldn't give you the address off the top of my head,
Called Oregon City Triathlon.
but
See if I can pull it up.
see if you've got the information there. I don't have the details. Got it all at home on my computer, but I don't have it memorized.
In one moment.
Hey, that's a good idea.
It's called the Clackamas Cove Triathlon. www.clackamascovetriathlon.com.
Is it Clackamas or Clackamas?
One moment.
Too small for powerboats.
Clackamas Cove Triathlon.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can all head there for info.
The Northwest's Best New Triathlon,
Yeah.
June 23rd, 2013, Oregon City.
Yeah.
Maybe we should challenge the PrAC members and just feel a team and control a team. And
Yeah, let's challenge them to stand up.
It's part of our active transportation goal.
But they're planning it for fairly early in the day to minimize the traffic conflicts, because they are shutting down short sections of road and flagging other sections. So,
Good to know.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
Okay, do we have any staff reports?
Let's see. So the transportation system plan is moving forward for adoption, and I will send you a link to that. We had a good turnout at the South End Concept Plan meeting on June 1st at McLaughlin Elementary School. We've got a initial draft concept map, and we'll be moving forward with writing the actual text of the plan. Basically, the comments that we've heard from the public so far are generally supportive of some limited retail along South End in very well-chosen spots. There is some reaction to that from certain groups, but I think the amount of outreach that has been done online and through surveys and public meetings and through the mapping exercises that we've done with the public in our meetings has actually helped bring people to understand that in 30, 40 more years, South End Road will really need some of this more mixed use. And we hope that we continue to have the support of our community advisory team members who've been with us all along, which are a great group of people, volunteers who all have been participating since September and applied to be volunteers. We actually had to turn away volunteers to be on this citizen advisory team because we had 18 positions and they all filled. So that's been good, and Bob's been involved in it. We hope that as we move forward towards implementation that we can dovetail nicely with any efforts that the Transportation System Plan is doing as well, because the biggest component that we're dealing with down there is how to fund the right kinds of road improvements for the area in the future. And still keep it feeling like South End, because the number one value that we've heard is keep it rural, even though it is within the urban growth boundary. So it's going to be a challenge. So that's kind of all the staff reports I have at this point.
Regarding the concept plan, is there, this is to Bob or Pete, any major developments that are being considered out there at this time, such as what was occurring in Park Place concept plan or Beaver Creek?
Nothing can be proposed for annexation until the plan is adopted. No, I'm not aware that there's any one landowner who's interested in developing. From a land use perspective, you're dealing with about 160 different parcels of land. Some are fairly large, and some are existing county subdivisions that were approved in the 70s and are on septic. There's about 3 subdivisions like that. So it really does vary. The large parcels have considerable potential to redevelop, and some of the smaller ones do not. But the metro long-range planning regulations that we're working within require that we plan for a future density of overall of about 8 units per acre, and that's spread between a multitude of different types of housing, not just single family, but cottage housing, assisted living, multifamily, attached row house, and different types of products. So it really will be a different community in 30 more years. The city gets metro money to do long-range planning, which is, if we didn't have that money to do long-range planning, annexations would just be submitted to us, and then we would have to kind of anticipate how we should grow at that point rather than being able to do advanced planning like this. So it really is a benefit to the city to be able to plan like this well in advance. Although it is controversial because people don't necessarily make the distinction between a planning process and a privately driven development application. And this is a planning process. So we try to point that out. But I'm not aware of anything yet. There is a lot of land that's down there that is on septic today and has been on septic since the 70s. And so some of those septic systems are probably going to fail in the near future. And at that point, state regulations require hookup if they are within a certain distance of existing city sewer. And if that affects a subdivision, and where a subdivision largely happens that way, say 30% of a subdivision, the septics fail out in the county, and they're within 300 feet, then that kind of triggers a separate type of annexation process because you have a public health emergency on your hands. It's a little bit different than the parcel that's way down South End Road, say 1,000 feet down, where the property owner's, either not willing to develop or is just waiting for a concept plan to be adopted so that they can potentially hook up. It varies. Yeah.
In those developed subdivisions where they're found, who actually tracks to see if they reach that 30% threshold? I'm just curious.
City doesn't. The Water Environmental Services, which is the county entity that issues permits for replacement or repair of existing septic systems, is the authority that kind of makes that call. And if your tank is filled up, from what I understand, and I don't understand a lot about the septic policy, but if your tank is filled and your drain field no longer works, you're not allowed to replace it. But I don't know. Maybe some of you are more knowledgeable about this than I am. Yeah. And at that point, you're kind of stuck. You either have to bite the bullet and make the septic the sewer connection, or wait. Which is probably not an option, because if the sewer connection is about, $6,000 to $7,000, and you can pay it off over the long term, because you may have to trench and do all this other thing.
When we checked at a house like that, though, it wasn't, the annexation still required a public vote.
Yes.
Even if
Yes.
but it seemed like the property owner was responsible for paying the cost of that public vote.
It depends on when the public vote occurs. If it's on a primary year, you may not have to incur that cost. But you do have to put a deposit down. You may get it back. Yeah, but in general, they are on the hook for it unless they get that deposit and back. So, yeah.
Park Place was annexed by the city about 20-some years ago.
With the portions that are directly abutting Holcomb Boulevard, the Park Place area that is in the city today was annexed in 1999, I think, or 1991,
Yeah.
because of sewer.
Right.
And then the portion that the Park Place concept plan is looking at is still in the county officially.
Right.
Yeah, so that's about 400 acres. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was there was a health issue, as I recall. The city was forced into accepting that area in part or fully. But
Yeah. And
the reason
then-
I'm bringing it up is that that has been the history of one major acquisition of land the city had to take in because of failing systems.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would play out in South End at all.
Yeah.
At this point, I couldn't say.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I don't have anything else to report at this time.
Okay. So our next scheduled meeting is July 10th, and it sounds like we'll have a busy meeting because we have some stuff to vote on. And unless there's any further discussion, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.